Hello, I'm Becky Tregear and welcome to my big fat Greek sketchbook tour. Because yes, I finished a whole book while I was in Greece. Well, about 75% there and the rest at home. Today I'm going to show it to you, so let's get into it. So this is a softcover A5 Stillman Birn sketchbook from the Beta range, so it has thick watercolor paper. It's pretty battered. I mean, this thing went everywhere with me, and I ended up covering it with stickers that I'd bought from various places or had found. I labelled it Greece 2023, and here are some more stickers on the back. That Leonidas one in the bottom corner is from a chocolate shop, but I thought this would be a fun way to decorate the book. And it gives you a preview of what's inside and where we went. I will be adding some of my video footage into this so you can get some context of my pictures too, because otherwise it's going to be pretty meaningless as to what some of them are. Opening the book up, on the inside page I've got all of my paint palettes and crowns that I took with me, plus some of my contact details there that are all of my YouTube ones, so that's perfectly fine for you to see them. And then I did a title page, Sketches in Greece, including some bits and pieces I cut off paper bags because we didn't want to bring them all home, so I just harvested a few of them to stick into my book. And the Greek flag is from the one at the top of the Acropolis. I had to include it somewhere. Flipping over to the next page spread, and I've got a contents page on the left here where I grouped the pages by week that we were there rather than every single page being labelled, because that would have taken forever. There's 52 pages in here. And here's the little cat that I drew. This one lived outside this particular restaurant because I guess they fed it every day. There are a lot of cats in Greece and you'll see more of them as we go along. It has a clipped ear because it had been neutered, and that's apparently what they do in Greece. Here in Australia, they tattoo the inside of the cat's ear. A number of Nick's family share ownership of a kiosk in Piraeus, and so I had to sketch that one. Here's a photo of Nick talking to his auntie. These sorts of kiosks, or periptero, are everywhere in Greece, and you can buy all sorts of stuff in them, like little convenience stores. I realised that I never actually drew a picture of the car that we had, which is this Volkswagen T-Roc. I did not drive in Greece. Nick did all of the driving because it was much cheaper just to insure one driver. And honestly, there is no way I would have handled the stress of driving on the other side of the road in a really heavy traffic. So for much of our time in Athens, we actually ended up catching public transport. And where we were staying, there was a tram, which actually went all the way into town. It was really convenient. Just like being in Melbourne. Oh yes, this was so much better than driving. That tram got packed by the time we got into the city centre, I can tell you that. And speaking of packed, no trip to Athens is complete without visiting the Acropolis, and boy were there so many people. It didn't look too bad down at the bottom as we were walking up. I mean, there were a few tour groups here and there, but as we got further to the top, more and more people just started appearing, and it was so crowded. I've been to the Acropolis a few times. This was by far the busiest I've ever seen it. And yes, I am about to show you my next sketchbook page, but I thought I'd give you some context as to what I sketched next. And so you can share in some of the experiences that I had. This part here is the entrance to the top and where the Parthenon is on the other side. And despite all of the people, there is something special about walking through this little part and then basically seeing the Parthenon just there. We'll ignore that crane on the left-hand side. Okay, there we go, there's the first glimpse of it. And of course everyone else is snapping pictures too. It's totally worth seeing. I mean, it's almost 2,500 years old, and such an iconic building. And I, of course, had to try drawing it. It was so difficult to draw. And I only spent about 15 minutes because it was really cold up there. Neither of us had remembered to bring a jacket. Really clever. But back to my sketchbook. Here are the two drawings that I did of the Parthenon. The one on the right is up the top of the hill. Oh gosh, it's so bad. But I left it in there just so you could see what it was like to draw something in a really short amount of time. And then I did it later from a photograph. It's a little bit better, but the proportions are still totally off. It's so complicated with all of those pillars. But I'm glad I tried, and I wouldn't mind actually trying to do an oil painting of this at some point. But moving on for now, and we have more cats. The one on the left is Acropolis Cat, as I named it. I mean, there's all this ancient history around it, but instead everyone's just going, oh, look at the kitty. Well, I was at least. Of course, I had to pat it as well. But here's the photo I took, which I used as my reference. And the other picture I drew is of a tiny kitten that was just sleeping in the street next to a parked car. Here it is for reference. Oh, I just wanted to take them all home. But since I couldn't do that, I have photos and drawings instead. I also stuck my Acropolis ticket in the book. And moving to the other side are a few things when we were wandering around Athens city. This really pretty flower, a wall of strawberries at the market in Monastiraki, and the fountain at Syntagma Square. Just little snippets of things that really stood out to me, rather than full-on landscapes. So we moved on from Athens and drove about 4 hours to the port town of Patra so we could catch a ferry over to the island of Kefalonia. You can see the weather was really great at this time. But next to where we parked here, there was this sad-looking carnival ride. Oh gosh, how depressing does that look? But the ferry itself was really impressive and very large so that it can take cars and trucks on it. The ferries in Greece are excellent and I highly recommend using them if you want to get to the islands. So we headed off and here's a view of Patra town. It's not too bad, I like the hills in the background. And this brings me to the next page spread in my book. On the left side are a few things that we saw in Patra while we were waiting for the ferry, because we made sure to get there with plenty of time to spare, and there's that very sad looking ride. Ah, those are some despairing eyes, I have to say. I knew I had to draw that into the book. And on the right side is a drawing of the ferry, and then a drawing of the view from the ferry looking out the window. I drew this on the ferry because it was a 3.5 hour journey, and I had plenty of time to sit there and do something. Now I think about it, I did actually do the entire page spread on the ferry, so that kept me entertained. We actually managed to get a sunny day in Kefalonia, and I've got a lovely page spread here of paintings I did while laying on a sun lounger at the beach. This is Costa Costa Beach at Argostoli in Kefalonia. Not much to see other than sky, sea and sand, and then looking to the left there was a little bit of a view, so I painted that in as well. My sketchbook is a combination of plein air paintings like this, which I did on location, also called urban sketching, and then others are taken from photos that I took, which I then sketched in later. I also took a video of what I was seeing so you can all see it too. Gosh, it's so beautiful. And this was such a relaxing day, lounging under the umbrella. Here's a picture of my sketchbook stuff, as I was painting the pictures with sand everywhere. And to the next page I have some more snippets of Kefalonia, the I Heart Kefalonia sign down by the riverside, and I also had a little bit of space to draw in a souvenir keyring that I bought of an evil eye, which is very iconic in Greece, to ward off evil spirits. And on the other side is sunset at the local lighthouse. I painted this from the photo that I took, with a bit of artistic license adding in brighter colours on my painting. And here's the keyring that I bought, and I'm actually using this one, but I pretty much drew the picture from the keyring itself. Not a bad likeness. Now I didn't include everywhere that we went in Greece in my sketchbook, that would have been impossible, but I did take plenty of photos along the way, so I have lots of reference images for future paintings as well. Really, this is a highlights tour of what we did in Greece. It's very hard to fit in an entire month into one video. But one of the reasons we went to Kefalonia was to visit Gentilini Winery, which is owned by one of Nick's university friends, Peter. Really lovely guy, so full of energy. The weather was not quite as good on this day, you can see how windy it is, but it was really interesting just wandering around the winery and what a view it has over the water there. My camera was wobbling because it was blowing so hard up there, it was freezing too. But I tasted some of the rosé wine even though I don't really drink, and it was very nice. There was also a cat which kept us company, and overall it was a fun day out. I captured some of this stuff in my sketchbook, and I'll flip to that page now. So on the left hand side you can see sketches I made from my photographs, and I of course had to include Chicken Nugget, the winery's cat, in there. I quite like how this page turned out, like a collage. And on the right side of the page are a few other snippets. I drew my breakfast because it was so delicious and looked really beautiful. And there was also just a pretty window that we walked past and I recorded that as well. Bougainvillea were flowering everywhere in Greece at the time. Over the page, and I drew a few more things on the next ferry when we left Kefalonia back to the mainland. Another cat, the ferry, and a view from the window of the ferry. And also my ticket. This time we went to Astakos instead of Patra. We were actually meant to take a smaller ferry to Lefkava Island, but high winds meant they cancelled on the day, so we had to get this bigger ferry back to the mainland first and then drive around to Vonitsa, where one of Nick's aunties lives, and we stayed with her for the night. And there was another heart sign, so I figured I'd add that in there. That's meant to be a castle. Above it is not a very good drawing. The things at the bottom are cut from a paper bag. So it was an unexpected detour, but it all worked out in the end, thankfully. Just down the road from Vonitsa is the village of Aios Nikolaos, which is Nick's mother's village, and a lot of family members on his mother's side still actually live there. We stayed in the village house for a week and just visited a few places around the area. I really like it out there, it's nice and restful. I included a page spread of the village, including Grandma's house, the local church, and some of the wildflowers that were around the area. I especially love the poppies. I also wrote some notes about Lake Volcaria, which is on the opposite page, because apparently Queen Cleopatra crossed it at one point when she was escaping from a war. And this is not even a tourist attraction, it's just something that the locals know about. And there's a little bit of information online, but really there's not much out there. I really like how this painting turned out. I love the stormy clouds. And I really want to recreate this as an oil painting at some point. It's one of my favourite paintings in the sketchbook. We also found the canal which Cleopatra went through, and it's just hidden behind the village, all overgrown. But here it is. There is a little signpost to it, but otherwise there's nothing to say that this is where a significant historical event happened. There used to be a bridge across it, but it's collapsed because no one has taken care of it, and it's quite sad to see. But it was really fascinating just being there and imagining her on a barge sailing down this tiny canal. It's quite pretty too. On the next page of my sketchbook are a few more things from the village. Roxy is one of the family's dogs. She'd sadly been hit by a car and her jaw was protruding, but she was quite happy otherwise. She'd healed from her injuries. A mini churchette letterbox thing, and these wet hankies, better known as wet wipes if you're from an English-speaking country. For non-English speakers, a hanky is something that you blow your nose in, so I was highly amused by that and I had to bring some home. Next, we're going over to Lefkava, which is a short drive away from the village, and you can actually get across by car, which is great. It's a very pretty island as well. Here's where I was standing when I took the picture for that particular little painting. It's quite a touristy area, but it wasn't as busy as some other places that we went to. There are so many pretty buildings around the main town, and I tried to draw some of them. Not very well, it turns out. The perspective is all completely wrong here. Architecture is extremely difficult to draw, and this was actually quite good practice for me. I was able to improve over time, but yeah, this drawing's pretty terrible as I was showing there. I like the colours though. And then I have a few more highlights from Lefkava on this side. Some of the local residents. And also, I was just fascinated by how many souvenirs there were, especially on the Greek islands, so I drew some of the mugs that were there. And Black Rose is a store that I bought some jewellery from. From Aios Nikolaos, we did a day trip to Nick's father's village of Kypseli. Incredibly pretty place. Look at those gorgeous mountains in the background. The village itself is very quiet though. However, there is one place nearby, and hickers pass at their own risk. The Acheron River. Absolutely gorgeous colour. Look at that beautiful water. It streams out from underground springs. And according to Greek mythology, the Acheron River was known as the River of Lost Souls and is one of the 5 rivers of the Greek underworld. So basically this is a gateway to Hades, and I just think that is so fascinating. Right here on the other side of the rock is commonly known as the gateway, and we had to climb up on the rocks in order to see it. Around here is where Hercules fought and bested the 3-headed dog Cerberus, guardian of the underworld. And here it is, everyone, one of the gateways to the underworld. If that is not the most heavy metal thing ever, I don't know what is. This man here took a photo of his black Labrador, which I'm guessing was kind of like Cerberus, only this is the one-headed dog. But here are the little paintings that I did on that day. I did all of this while in Kypseli. The painting on the left-hand side was urban sketching from the balcony of Nick's uncle and aunt's house. and I only used pencil and paint. In this one I didn't actually use any of the black pen to outline it. And I took some photos and painted these while on the balcony as well, just of the Acheron River and the gateway. And I mentioned that dog with only one head. I'd used washi tape to separate the paintings. It's okay, a little rushed, but you get the idea. Onwards to the next location, that is if we can get out of this traffic jam. Goats walking down the road is a fairly common occurrence, at least in this part of the countryside, and we had to wait quite a while for the herd to move on. I don't mind though, I like goats. The car was pretty much surrounded at one point, so we just had to sit there and wait for them to go by. And after driving through some very pretty countryside, we made it back to the coast and to one of my all-time favourite places in Greece, though it was also pretty packed with tourists this time around, the beautiful coastal town of Parga. I love it here so much, it is just stunningly beautiful. And we had the best weather for it, it was such a gorgeous day. Look at that gorgeous turquoise water. And as with many popular Greek beaches, you can pay some euro to rent out a beach umbrella and a couple of sun lounges. We did not do that this time around, but I did go swimming! And I remembered to pack my waterproof camera, yay! Blinding everyone with my lily white skin. Nick got in the water too, it was bloody freezing, it doesn't look it, but the water was really cold. Not so bad once you were in it for a while. I was using my Crocs as little floaties, so that I could film more easily. It was so funny being in the water with the camera. I'd only gone out a little way, but the seabed had gotten very deep very quickly, so I didn't want to risk going out too far. The colour of that water though, I'm really glad I included cobalt turquoise and phthalo turquoise in my paint palette. But it's definitely not a Greek holiday without at least one swim. Moving right along. After we'd dried off and got changed, we walked around to the main part of town, which is not far, the beach is just over on the right there. And then that line of buildings is all restaurants along there. Plus a lot of boats, and I made them wave, ha ha. There's a tiny church on that island, which we've never been to, but I was just happy standing on the wharf, taking video and photos of all the stunningly beautiful scenery. I mean, it's just such a gorgeous place. And I think if I were to live in Greece, it would be in Parga. There's an old castle at the top of that hill, which we still haven't been to, because this time around we missed the little tourist train, and there wasn't another one for hours. I'm not too bothered, I was happier just going and wandering around this pretty little town. It's very touristy, but also incredibly charming, and there's lots of little alleyways and paths to walk down. But let's get back to my sketchbook, because of course I have some pictures of Parga in here. All of these were painted from photos that I took. Because I didn't really want to spend time on the day having to do all this, doing these paintings takes quite a long time, so it was just easier to take a picture sometimes and then paint it later in the evening or whenever I felt like doing it. Some pages I actually skipped and then came back to when I had more time to fill them in. Parga was one of these pages. I used a lot of random grey in this particular painting, but I would like to do an oil painting of Parga town. I think that would be really fun to do, especially when I have more time to spend getting the buildings right. Those are always so difficult. Here's a few more little snippets of Parga on the left-hand side, again working from photos that I took. Another beautiful bougainvillea, the red paint ran into the blue up the top there, and this cute little cottage. I just liked the red theme for this page. Then of course the weather turned again as soon as it was time to get onto the ferry, and next we're off to Corfu, or its Greek name Kerkyra. I liked Corfu a lot. We stayed in the main part, which is Corfu Old Town, and it was absolutely packed with tourists because a lot of cruise ships come there, and I think on the first day 3 huge cruise ships arrived at the same time and dropped off all of their passengers, so it was just mayhem everywhere. But in spite of that, or possibly because of it, it was just really charming and fun. There were so many winding streets and little shops to look in. It was one of those places that even though it's a bit of a tourist trap, it kind of didn't really detract from the appeal of the place. And I, of course, also took many photos of all the amazing buildings. I have a lot of photo references to use for my paintings. Flipping the page in my sketchbook, I have a spread of some of those places that we saw and just things that really stood out to me. So on the left page, I've got a picture of Plus Books and Coffee, which is featured in a Netflix show, Maestro in Blue. And on the right are some very lopsided buildings, but hey, it adds to their charm. On the next page is a green Vespa that I thought was perfectly placed in Old Town, some more bougainvillea, and a lovely window that I'd seen, so I just wanted to put that in my sketchbook to add in some colour. I didn't want everything to be buildings. Moving to the next page, we went out for the day to this gorgeous beach called Palio Kastritsa on the other side of Corfu Island, and I did some plein air painting whilst laying on a sun lounger outside one of the local restaurants. It's not very good, it does not do the place justice at all, but I thought I'd show you the painting first this time, and then I'll show you the absolute beauty of this place. If you want to go to Greece, you need to add Palio Kastritsa to your bucket list. What is with those little people I drew? It's just horrendous. But here's what I was actually seeing. So to the left by the buildings are the sun lounges that we were sitting on, and then I was looking across this gorgeous bay to the other side here. The water's so beautiful, and what a pretty beach it is. Surprisingly quiet compared to the rest of Corfu. This is where I was sitting when I painted my picture in the book. I went swimming here too because that water was crystal clear. There were quite a lot of fishes swimming in the water as well, so that was quite fun. They were all surrounding me at one point. And yes, I wore my Crocs again because there were rocks at the bottom and I didn't want to stand on those and cut my bare feet or something like that. But this was a fabulous day out, so relaxing and such tranquil scenery. Here are the fish, and then my camera battery died, so I'll flip over to the next page. I've got a mishmash of things over here. We caught a bus in Old Town down the road to Kanoni, which is just another little place on the coast, and there's a Corfu sign there. It also looks out over this stunningly beautiful bay with the tiny island of Pontikonisi, or Mouse Island. Here we go, what a pretty view this one is, and that's Mouse Island just out there. We walked down the hill to the little marina there, and in the foreground is Vlacherna Monastery, which I went into but I didn't actually include in my sketchbook this time around. We paid about €3 to catch a little boat over to the island of Pontikonisi, and it was really pretty out on the water. Such a gorgeous day this one was too, about 25 degrees Celsius. And then we had to schlep up a whole bunch of stairs because there's a monastery at the top. Honestly, everywhere in Greece has stairs. I certainly got my steps in this day. And coming up towards the top here was a little doggo just sitting there on the stairs, and of course I had to pat him as I went past. I mean, forget about the sights when there are cute animals to pet. This one was such a sweetie. Honestly, I get so distracted. Okay, fine, we'll look at the little church up here. Isn't it cute? I took lots of photos, of course, and inside it had quite a pretty dome with the chandelier thingy. And next to the monastery is a little souvenir shop, and I was pretty tempted by these until I saw the price. I think they were €26 each, so I opted to take a picture and draw them in my sketchbook instead. I can't decide if they're cute or tacky. Let me know in the comments what you think. I think if they were under €10, I probably would have bought those. But that was me just showing the souvenir shop on the side. And moving over to the next page, I basically stuck in some of my tickets. I've got the bus ticket and a couple of museums that we went to. I had a bit of room left, so I painted in the old fort at Corfu. There's also a new fort, which is still hundreds of years old, but we decided not to go here because it was just way too hot on that day. We took photos from afar instead. Oh, and here's the Corfu sign. Another place we visited was Mon Repos, birthplace of Prince Philip, and there's a really lovely estate home there, which is now a museum. Really pretty gardens too, and a nice stroll to the old manor, which is now the museum, and you can pay a few euro to go inside. I tried to draw the building in my book, but only half of it worked, so I just left half of it in there. But I'm actually quite happy with how that turned out. Here's a closer view of it. I'd also seen that sign somewhere in town, and so I thought I'd add that in too. And then here is a painting I did much later from photos I took on the ferry as we were leaving Corfu, because this was the only time the weather was decent on a ferry. But I do like how this page spread turned out. And there's a good view of the new fort, along with a lot of the buildings in Old Town. Such a pretty place. If you ever go to Greece, I do recommend visiting Corfu. We had a great time there, I really enjoyed it. There's a lot to see and do. But it was time to head back to the mainland, and here we are about to land at the port in Igoumenitsa. I have to say the car ferries in Greece are absolutely amazing, and they cram so many vehicles on there, including some enormous trucks. Our car was one of the first to get on, so of course it was last to get off. But at least by then most of the traffic had cleared out, so it was easy enough to get into the car. The cars were so crammed in I couldn't get in the door, so I had to wait for the car to get off the ferry. We had a fair drive inland to get to our next destination, through some pretty countryside, a lot of gorgeous hills, and at one point a really cool monastery on top of a hill. I thought that was amazing. Here's a photo I took for a future painting. We eventually reached our hotel in the small town of Kalambaka, and there's a real reason for coming here, ticking this off my bucket list. The view from our window, Meteora, the most incredible rock formations, with 6 working monasteries perched on top of them. I was so inspired by the view that I just immediately had to drop everything and paint this into my book. So I sat on the balcony and sketched this. It's only half of the rocks because I just couldn't fit it into the book. I had tried to draw it smaller, but it just wasn't working, so I just decided to do half of it. You can see one monastery on that rock over there, and there's another one coming up on the right hand side here. I used a lot of Schminke Random Grey for this. It's good for rocks, it's nice and granulating, but I am quite happy with how that turned out. I decided to paint just the rocks and not the buildings in front. We spent a full day driving around the various monasteries up at Meteora. The views are just stunning, and I took so many photos up here, more than I can fit into this video, but I'll show you the drawings that I did in my sketchbook. We visited 3 of the 6 monasteries properly, and the ones you're seeing now are the 3 that we did not visit, but I took lots of pictures of them anyway. We visited Rusano Nunnery of St. Barbara, 154 steps to get up to that one. The Monastery of St. Nikolaos, of course, that one had a lot of steps too. And the Monastery of St. Stephanos, which was the easiest to get to. Here are my sketches. I did a page side for each monastery. The first one is the nunnery. There was a great view of it from further down the road, towering over everything. And what you can't see from the road is this beautiful little garden inside. Nuns do actually live there, so they've made their surroundings comfortable with beautiful gardens as well. And on the next page is St. Nikolaos Monastery. I think 3 monks live here, but at the very top is that bell tower. And I was very happy that we'd made it all the way to the top because this was the most difficult to climb of the 3 of them, right up the top there. But I quite like how this page spread turned out. It's pretty chaotic with a lot of different scenes because I couldn't pick which photos to put in here. Turning the page to the 3rd monastery, which is St. Stephanos, I did the left-hand page side with a couple of views. Here's the monastery with a kitty out front, and some of my tree leaked into the sky there. Oops! But I thought that would make an interesting subject having the cat in there. And the monastery gardens with living quarters for monks and nuns. All of the monasteries were lovely inside, but I'm going to move on from Meteora because it was just too much to have in this video, and let me talk a little bit about this page. On our way back to Athens, we stopped in Thermopylae, which really isn't very much to see, but if you have seen the movie 300, this is the actual place where it happened. As I struggle up these stone steps, King Leonidas and his 300 Spartans basically held off an army of 10,000 Persians for 2 days before they were betrayed by Ephialtes of Trachis, who led the Persian army around behind them. Once he found this out, King Leonidas sent away allied forces, but he and the 300, along with 700 Thespians who opted to stay, fought to the death upon this hill of Kolonos, and here is a memorial for them. It translates to, "O stranger, tell the Spartans that here we lie, obedient to their laws." So this is where it happened, and there were poppies blooming everywhere, which I thought was quite poignant. It sounds like it would be a made-up story, but it actually happened. It was so weird being there. Across the road is a museum, which had a really fascinating 12-minute film about the whole battle. And there's a memorial area with a statue of King Leonidas himself. I looked him up, and he was 60 years old when he died, which is much older than I was expecting. But here he is, pointing out pretty much over to the hill of Kolonos, which is across the road. I'm so glad we stopped here. It's not hugely touristy, but it's just really fascinating, and they would have fought the Persians up in those hills. Next to Leonidas is a statue for the Thespians who fought and died alongside the Spartans. We also made friends with a stray dog who followed us everywhere. What a sweet animal. I really wanted to take him home. I'm very sad that we couldn't do that. But here's another look at the sketchbook page with the museum ticket and drawings of the statues, plus the memorial stone which I'd translated into English. There's no way I was trying to write that ancient Greek. I'm endlessly fascinated by the story of the 300. I didn't know about the Thespians though, so I learned something new. So in our last week in Greece, we spent it back in Athens. Nick wanted to see his grandmother again, and we wandered around shopping areas like Plaka. But we also did a couple of day trips to places just outside of Athens, and those are pretty much my final places in my sketchbook that we went to. The first was the Temple of Poseidon at Sunion. It's very well placed for the worship of an ocean god, and here it is much closer as we paid admission to come up and see it. The weather was lovely this day too, and it actually wasn't too busy. There was a busload of tourists that came along, but otherwise it was relatively quiet. And there were lovely views from up here. You could see them all coming up now, so we managed to get ahead of them for the most part. But the Temple of Poseidon is definitely worth a visit. Apparently it's really good at sunset. We didn't make it back in time because it was just a bit too far to drive back for that. I got plenty of reference photos, so I'm happy. The other place we visited is the archaeological site of Vavron, which is not on the tourist map at all. I don't even think tour buses go here, so it's quite hard to get to unless you've got a car. But here on the site are the remains of an ancient temple to the goddess Artemis, roughly around 2,500 years old. And it's only been recently that they're actually restoring the place. There's also a tiny church, which was built around the 16th century, and this is for St. George. I mean, this building looks ancient, but it's nowhere near as old as those pillars out there. But it's still older than any building in Australia, which is quite hard for me to comprehend. Aside from a man cutting grass, there was hardly anyone here, and it was really lovely wandering around without crowds, and very pretty scenery too. There's also a really big museum here with all of the things they found in their diggings, and tiny sparrows were nesting in the temple. So I'll flip through the last pages of my sketchbook here. Oh my lord, this video is so long, but I did a full page spread of the Temple of Poseidon, and I also included my ticket, which cost €10. It's a bit much to go up there because there's not a museum or anything, but it was such a lovely day and we had a good time, so it was worth the money, I guess, in that respect. There's a nice restaurant there too, and some souvenir shops. And actually, this is where I bought the Greek colouring book, if you saw my previous video with the art haul. And I managed to get schmutz all over the page there, from the previous page, I think. Never mind. It means the sketchbook is well used and loved. Moving on to the next page, and here we have the archaeological site of Vavron on the left side. I thought I'd include both the temple and the church, because I couldn't pick between them, and they're both kind of historically significant, I guess, especially the Temple of Artemis. I like how this page turned out. And I should make a note that in this book I did use a lot of buff titanium, as well as that random grey. On the right hand side here, I'd snapped some photos in the museum, but I didn't film in there, and I painted in some of the amazing pots that they found in the dig. Also the hand of a statue, I think that's really awesome, plus my museum ticket. So that's all the places that I put into my book, but I had a couple of page spreads left and I couldn't leave them empty, so I did some collage pages of animals that I'd seen on our trip. The left hand side are all birds, including that little sparrow that was living in the Temple of Artemis, and there were swallows everywhere. There were storks. I've never seen storks before outside of Greece, and there was also a partridge, which is another bird that was unfamiliar to me. And over to the right hand side is that gorgeous dog at Thermopylae who I wanted to take home. He was our spirit guide because he followed us everywhere. And we also saw a turtle being rescued in Kefalonia. The poor thing had fishing line or netting wrapped around its fin, and kind volunteers had rescued it. He wasn't too happy about that, but we just happened to be there when they were doing this, so I got some pretty good pictures. And I wanted to do a painting of it. So I like how this spread turned out. And last page spread, it's gotta be cats. There were so many of them, they were everywhere on the trip, and I just wanted to record some of them in my book, I took a lot of photos and I was working off photo references here. Not all of the drawings have worked out very well, but I think it's a good way to end the sketchbook. And the picture on the right there is actually of a mural that was also in Catalonia, and I thought I'd copy that into my book. And now we come to the final page. Kudos to you if you've stayed here for the whole video. The end of a great trip, and it really was. We had such a good time there. I drew in this little cat plate that I could not resist. I found that in Catalonia, and I thought that would be a fun way to end the picture. I actually traced around the edge of the plate in order to get it in, and then I copied the details by sitting the plate next to it. It's not exactly the same, but it's pretty close. I'm actually quite happy with how that turned out, and I stuck in a few extra stickers on that inside cover. A map of Greece, a Corinthian helmet, and the Parthenon. And finally, we are at the end of the whole book. And just before I finish the video, I thought you might like to see my palettes after I've come back from a month-long trip. Here they are. You can see that certain colours have been used a lot, especially the buff titanium in that corner. I really needed more of that. I also used a lot of the blue manganese colour, the dark perylene green, and quite a few browns and other greens in there. My advice if you go to Greece is to have a lot of buff titanium because that colour was everywhere. And I've also got my tiny demi palette here which I also used. And you can see my very depleted paint pan of Schmincke Random Grey. That was a surprisingly useful colour and I'm so glad I had that one as well. So here are the two palettes side by side, looking very messy. But there's still heaps of paint, so these palettes were most excellent. And I highly recommend the art toolkits. Thank you all so much for watching. This video took me a long time to put together, so I'd really appreciate it if you can give me a thumbs up and click the subscribe button for more videos. Here's the tour of the art shops I visited and the art hall. I'll see you all again really soon in my next video. Swatch you later. Bye!